Hi, I'm Rahil Philippos, and you're listening to Three Things, the Indian Express News Show. In this episode, we talk about the India-Australia relationship and why China is bringing them closer. We also talk about the problems within the ranks of the NAAC, which is responsible for assessing the quality of India's higher educational institutions. But first, we talk about India at the Oscars.
And the Oscar goes to...
You guys ready?
The Elephant Whisperers, Kartiki, Gonsalves, and Guneet, Monga.
Yesterday, Indian artists created history during the 95th Academy Awards when RRR's chartbuster Naatu Naatu won the award for the Best Original Song, and Kartiki, Gonsalves and Guneet Monga's The Elephant Whisperers emerged as the winner in the Best Documentary Shorts category. Besides this, there was also Shaunak Sen's All That Breathes, which was nominated for the Best Documentary Feature Film. But it lost to Navalny, a documentary about the assassination attempt of the Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny. In this segment, we begin by talking about Naatu Naatu, which was composed by M.M. Keeravani and has become the first Indian film song to win the Oscars. To understand why this song became such a huge sensation and won an Oscar, my colleague Shashank Bhargav spoke to the Indian Express's Suanshu Khurrana.
Suanshu, the song Naatu Naatu has become quite popular in the West. You know, this big dance number that is actually pretty common in Indian films. So why do you think this particular song has resonated so much with international audiences?
Yeah, I mean, the success of Naatu Naatu, which goes by the name Naatu Naatu in Hindi, it's been quite surprising, for India, which is very used to the whole song and dance routine. Naatu Naatu was fun to begin with. But the international audience seemed to be very genuinely taken in by the song, by the dance hook that is there, by the way the two actors, Ram Charan and N.T.R. Ramarao Jr., pulled off this very energetic choreography with a lot of energy in this M.M. Keeravani composition. But in case of Naatu Naatu, what has been made to work, I think, is also the precursor to the song, which is this provocation scene in which, Akhtar is called a country oaf by a British officer, and what do you know about art, about finesse and about dance? And it's the 1920s, and it's the pre-partition space when Britain was ruling over a large part of the world, including India. So the Brits laugh, and the whole scene sort of rings a bell at this time, as racism remains an issue and has found resonance around the globe again in recent years. I think that is also a link there.
Not salsa, not flamenco, my brother.
Do you know Naatu?
And I think this is where Naatu Naatu sort of is a powerful masterstroke by Rajamouli. You want the hero to rise and shine in that moment. And because just when it becomes hurtful enough comes the song and dance. It's like a soft win, where the British are defeated. So it's drama at its best. It's loud, it's dramatic. But yeah, S.S. Rajamouli has pulled it off, and the international audience has been dancing to it since the last year.
Okay, so the song has become quite popular, but what do you think is the reason that the Academy chose this song over the others that were nominated this year?
It's interesting because it is, there were very interesting nominations alongside, like the Golden Globes, even for the Oscars. You had Rihanna's fabulous Lift Me Up, which to me personally would have been a very clear winner. But even Lady Gaga was not far behind. It was a beautiful song that, even in the live performance that we saw. But from the Academy's point of view, one feels that somewhere it could be an attempt to sort of pander to the Indian market as well. The Oscars, like any other organization, they need sponsors and sponsorship and advertising and viewers. And viewership comes from the largest country in the world, which, unlike China, does not have any internet restrictions. The more Indian curry one is sort of going to serve, the more Indians are going to flock, and many global sponsors who either have or want to have businesses in India are likely to be interested. With the popular wave about the song in place too, let's admit that as well, the win somewhere feels like catering to brand India rather than RRR. However, because the song by itself musically doesn't make the cut, because there are hundreds of songs in Telugu cinema, if I start including Tamil cinema, other regional cinema, they're very similar songs that exist. Sometimes even much better. Appadi Podu comes to mind. There is A.R. Rahman has done very similar songs. So why RRR? Of course, it is the anti-colonial saga. It is the story and Rajamouli's brilliant promotion and marketing budget that's taken it where it now is. But musically speaking, it doesn't sort of make the cut.
And you mentioned the composer M.M. Kirwani. Could you tell our listeners a bit about him and his career?
So M.M. Keeravani, he began playing the violin very early, and he was very taken by these R.D. Burman tunes, and he used to play Lakshmikant Pyarelal's Ek Pyar Ka Nagma Hai on the violin very early on. He used to travel with a little band of his. But he started his own career with Telugu cinema in 1987. But his first independent film, he was an assistant earlier, so his first independent film came in 1990, and which was Manasu Mamata. But it was Ram Gopal Verma's Telugu thriller Shana Shanam, which sort of really put him under the spotlight. Now, this was happening in Tollywood, and what was very interesting about M.M. Keeravani was that he also went by the name M.M. Cream, which a more Hindi-speaking audience has been more familiar with. He was responsible for creating some of the most memorable melodies of Hindi film industry in the 90s and I think early 2000s. Tum Mile Dil Khile from Criminal, Gali Mein Aaj Chand Nikla from Mahesh Bhatt, Zakham, O Sathiya from Saya, songs from Is Raat Ki Subha Nahi, Jism. So he's done some pretty brilliant music in the past in Hindi films. He also won a national award for one of his Telugu films. So it's 220 films, a very interesting oeuvre, a 25-year journey. And I think again the spotlight went on him when he did Bahubali. And post Bahubali, this particular film, RRR, sort of really catapulted him to much success.
And after talking about RRR, we will now look at India's other win, The Elephant Whisperers. Director Kartiki Gonsalves, after winning the Oscar for the documentary short, dedicated the award to India, while the producer Guneet Monga took pride in the fact that 2 women were bringing home the first Oscar for an Indian production.
This is the first Oscar for any Indian production, and 2 women here won this. 1.4 billion.
Back when it had first been nominated, we had spoken to the Indian Express's film critic Shubhra Gupta about The Elephant Whisperers. The documentary, which is available on Netflix, is set in the Madumalai National Park in Tamil Nadu and tells the story of a couple, Bomna and Belly, who together raise a baby elephant.
And it is quite astonishing to see the kind of connection between man and beast. And it's literally not even as if they are beasts, they look and they feel as if they are part human in the way they understand not just the commands that these people give them, but also just reciprocity of communication, of affection. It's quite lovely to see all of that. I've just been smiling since I watched it because it's such a smile of a film. It really is something that is, we use the word heartwarming so often that it becomes a cliche. But this is a film that makes your heart feel warm.
She says that in the documentary, you actually get to see the bond that the couple develops with the elephant, Raghu. And they do that in a very effortless way.
And elephants are supposed to be, they are wild beasts. They range long distances. They are not animals who are happy to stay in one little corner because they walk miles and miles. So the elephant actually tries in quite an astonishing way to adapt himself to the humans that are raising him. And he's a baby. He's 3 months old when they find him. One of his parents, I don't know whether it's the mother or the father, has been electrocuted. And the forest guards in this small little place in Tamil Nadu, they call him Baman, and say, come and rescue this. We have an elephant calf, come and take him away and see if you can, do something with him because the elephant calf, the 3-month-old baby is injured. He's got maggots are infesting parts of his body and his tail has been eaten by, or, snipped at by wild dogs. in a really bad state when Barman gets him back to his hut and the little space that they have, which is dedicated to the elephant. And that's when you start to see it's not even affection, I would say it's deep love, which sort of starts to blossom between this man and this woman, and start raising him as they would a small child.
Kayaknya kutar mana aja? Kita bah, berda, bani lagi, bah, kita bah, bani lagi, kita ni. Kayaknya bani.
So I just wanted to say something about the person Kartiki Gonsalves, the director of the Elephant Whisperers. I read somewhere that she spent 2 years tracking this elephant and this couple. And I read somewhere also that they started to treat her like their own daughter. Apparently, the mandate was from the couple that they would not do any acting, that it would be just the way they lived their lives. And you could see that play out in front of you. It's almost like a family coming together. The reason why I brought up Kartiki Gonsalves is that the relationship between the person who's shooting the film and the subjects, so to speak, has to be so close that you do not see anything, no interventions.
And next we talk about Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese's recent visit to India. Last week, Albanese visited the country for the first time since becoming the Prime Minister in 2022. Now, India and Australia have enjoyed strong diplomatic ties since the Cold War. But one of the biggest things tying these two countries together is their mutual love for cricket. So it only seems fitting that Albanese's trip began at the Narendra Modi Stadium in Ahmedabad, where he attended the first day of the India-Australia Test match with Prime Minister Narendra Modi. Off the cricket pitch, the two leaders engaged on a range of important issues, particularly their role in ensuring the safety of the Indo-Pacific region in the face of Chinese aggression. The Indian Express's Shubhajit Roy joins us in this segment to talk about the outcome of Albanese's visit, cricket diplomacy, and the Quad grouping's response to the China factor. So Shubhajit, could you first talk to us about the reason behind Albanese's visit to India?
Yeah, so, Rahel, India and Australia decided to hold an annual summit every year between the two leaders. Basically, what it means is that the prime ministers of the two countries will meet each other every year in a bilateral visit. So 1 year, Indian Prime Minister has to go to Australia, and the next year, the Australian Prime Minister visits India. So that format has been agreed to. So this was the Australian Prime Minister's turn to come to India.
And in the decades leading up to this visit, how has the Australia-India relationship evolved?
Yeah, Rahel, as you know, India-Australia relationship, there's been a transformation in the relationship in the last decade and a half or so. So the end of the Cold War and the beginning of India's economic reforms in 1991 actually gave the impetus for the development of closer ties between the two countries. And the increasing number of Indian students, increasing number of Indian tourists, and sports links, into Australia playing cricket very regularly. So these have played a role in people-to-people contacts and a stronger bilateral relations, especially since 2014. Obviously, the economic trade relationship is very, very important, but the strategic relationship, the defense partnership is also taking off. Apart from, as I mentioned, people-to-people relationship, cultural relationship, those links apart, and the Chinese sort of belligerence or aggressiveness has been evident against Australia as well. So therefore, there has been a sense that India and Australia must forge closer relationship, closer partnership in the decades to come.
So we'll come back to this point about the Chinese threat. But before that, let's talk about diplomatic ties between these two countries. We hear a lot about a comprehensive strategic partnership whenever there is a conversation about the India-Australia relationship. So can you explain to us what exactly that means?
So India and Australia had a strategic partnership since 2009, but in 2020, they elevated it to a comprehensive strategic partnership. And what happened was, because the relationship has gone really on a stronger footing, so from economy to defense to supply of uranium, so for civilian nuclear deal was also signed for supply of uranium. So when you combine all these elements, aspects of the relationship, that's what actually a comprehensive strategic partnership means. And that just shows the trust level between the two countries at the leadership level, at the political level. So Australian Prime Minister was the first foreign leader to visit this indigenously developed INS Vikrant, to which he in fact said there that India is a top-tier strategic partner, security partner, and there's never been a point in both the countries' histories where they've had such a strong strategic alignment. Apart from that, obviously, there are other areas also, and notably one area of cooperation which is growing up is clean energy, green energy. This is new and renewable energy, which includes on green hydrogen and low-cost solar technology. So those are also areas where, the two sides are cooperating.
Right. And Shubhajit, it's interesting that you mentioned cricket. Foreign leaders keep visiting India, but this visit managed to catch national interest because of that cricket factor. Albanese started his visit by attending the India-Australia test match in Ahmedabad. Talk to me a little bit about the match and why these two leaders attending the match mattered.
So, people-to-people relationship, cultural relationship, sporting relationship are a very important element in a bilateral relationship with any country. So what this means is that there is a large public opinion which is favorable towards Australia that builds up because of the soft power. So leaders usually use these elements to beef up a visit or the relationship. So, for example, when I remember Prime Minister Modi, he had gone to Australia in 2014 for the G20 Leaders Summit in Brisbane. At that point of time, also Australians had hosted him at the Melbourne Cricket Ground, which is like the Mecca of cricket and, MCG as it's popularly known. So it was when the Australian PM came, he was taken to the cricket stadium, which used to be called Motera Stadium. Now it's been renamed as Narendra Modi Stadium by the Gujarat Cricket Association. So in that, they watched the match. So those are also occasions. They're not just watching the match. They are also getting an opportunity to have a conversation informally, which is outside the structured, very officious, formal setting. So which is useful for top leaders to have. And that is where actually a lot of times the important conversations take place, which otherwise in formal settings may not happen, and also help the leaders to break ice or develop a personal chemistry between the two sides. And that eventually helps in negotiating deals and, in furthering the partnership. So that's how this cricket diplomacy or this sports diplomacy needs to be seen as. These are enablers to develop better relationship for India's benefit. And similarly, Australians will see it for Australia's national benefit.
And talking about important conversations and negotiations, during his visit, Albanese spoke to both Modi and Jaishankar. What were the major outcomes of these talks?
So the two sides obviously underline the defense and security as key pillars of their strategic relationship, and also agreed to sort of wrap up their economic trade agreement, the CECA, as soon as possible. In that sense, trade and defense security pillars were the main focus areas. Apart from that, they also had agreements on setting up task forces to cooperate on solar energy and green hydrogen. And Modi, in his remarks, also said that, he raised the issue of attacks on Hindu temples and the Indian community being targeted by pro-Khalistan elements. So he expressed his strong concern to the Australian Prime Minister. And Australian Prime Minister has also assured him that, action will be taken, necessary measures will be taken, and the safety of the Indian community is a special priority for him as well. So some conversations on the tough subjects as issues between the two sides, as well as of convergences between the two sides were discussed.
And coming back to what you'd earlier said about the China factor, now, interestingly, by next month, every single Quad member country would have paid a visit to India. And within the Quad, of which, of course, both India and Australia are members, there's this growing concern about China's aggressiveness. And that has been a major point of discussion in all these bilateral talks. So, can you tell us a little bit about these different countries of Quad and how they plan on addressing this concern?
So, China's belligerence in the region is evident by all the countries of the Quad grouping. Australia faced China's wrath when they cancelled or did not give the 5G technology account to the Chinese company Huawei. And then they raised questions on the origins of COVID, wanted an investigation by the Chinese. So the Chinese really hit back by blocking exports or imports from Australia on Australian wine and other products. So there's been tension between Australia and China. Similarly, India and China are going through a border standoff for the last almost 3 years. Now in May, it will be 3 years of the border standoff. So there is tension between China and each of the Quad countries at different levels. So all these countries really see China not playing by the book, not playing by the rules and the international norms. So they are exchanging notes very closely. And later this year, Quad Leaders Summit will take place. And then again in September, the Quad leaders will again meet during the G20 Leaders Summit. So as you know, these are exchanges on opportunities and occasions where the leaders have the time and the willingness to have a conversation, discuss on their approach towards China, that essentially everyone wants China to play by the rules of the game and not violate the international order. So as we saw with Russia-Ukraine war, where Russia has violated the global order and by invading Ukraine. So the three Quad countries are mindful that China has been a consistent strategic sort of threat to the global world order. But now Russia has also emerged as another violator. So that understanding, I think for that you need a continuous assessment of the threat perception and how to respond so that they can join hands together and, exchange notes and also carry forward their bilateral relationship in the next few years.
And in the end, we talk about a crisis within the ranks of the National Assessment and Accreditation Council, or NAAC. The NAAC plays a pretty important role in assessing the quality of India's higher educational institutions. But the former chairman of the body, Bhushan Patwardhan, has repeatedly flagged what he saw as irregularities in the way that this body functions. Soon after he took over as NAAC chairman last year, he set up a panel to probe the body's functioning. But when the University Grants Commission, or UGC, failed to act on the issues flagged by the panel in a report it submitted last year, Patwardhan announced that he was resigning. To understand why the NAAC is facing allegations of irregularities and what prompted Patwardhan to take this drastic step, the Indian Express's Sourav Roy Barman joins me in the segment. So, to start with, Sourav, what is this National Assessment and Accreditation Council and what is it responsible for?
So, all of us have taken exams and, our teachers graded us in school, in college, in university based on our performance. So, in a similar way, NAAC is an agency which grades our colleges and universities after a thorough quality check. So, it will look into an institute's curriculum or say infrastructure, the kind of research they're putting out, and also their financial status. So essentially, NAAC is an agency under the UGC which grades our higher education institutes. So the grade can be anything between A++ to C based on how exactly the institute is placed.
So those lists we see in magazines every year, of the country's top 10 colleges, are those rankings based on the NAAC's accreditation system?
Yes, absolutely. Yes, correct. If an institute gets, if you got a good grading, obviously you will try and advertise it to, attract students and parents. So yeah, they do advertise.
Right. And how exactly does this accreditation process work?
So till late, it's largely voluntary. So as an institute, you will have to approach the NAAC initially. So the NAAC will put your name in a queue. And when your time comes, you will have to submit a report containing everything, all information related to your institute. Everything, I mean, the number of faculty you have, the number of students you have, the kind of resources you have, kind of infrastructure you have. Then the NAAC will go through that report. They have their own, teams of experts. They will go through that report. And the last step is essentially spot visits by teams of experts. So there will be large teams which will be coming to your institute to carry out, spot checks. Whatever you said in your report is correct or not.
And just last month, the former chairman of the NAAC, Bhushan Patwardhan, said that this accreditation process and the functioning of the NAAC needs to be looked into. In fact, Patwardhan tendered his resignation just last weekend. So can you tell me what led him to take that step?
See, basically, he took over as a NAAC chairperson in February last year. And since then, he's been flagging, many instances of corruption, many irregularities in the entire process of accreditation. And he also wrote multiple letters to the UGC chairman. And for quite some time, he waited for action to be taken. But eventually, according to him, nothing happened. So there was no action taken based on his letters. So he didn't quit first. He expressed his desire to quit. Last month, he wrote a letter to the UGC chairman saying that I have been writing to you with all these allegations and I have waited for far too long. So I think I should resign. He didn't say I'm resigning though. But according to him, the UGC considered that letter as his letter of resignation. So very promptly, they appointed a new chairman in his place. And he opposed that obviously, saying he didn't quit. He was merely expressing his intent to resign. But he didn't put up a fight for far. Very next day he said, okay, fine, I'm putting in my papers.
Right. And like you said, this wasn't the first time that Patwardhan was flagging these issues to the UGC. In fact, right after he took over as NAAC chairman last year, he set up this panel to look into the functioning of the NAAC, right? And the panel then released a report in September. So can you tell me a little bit about this review panel as well as this report that it released?
Right. So immediately after he took over, he set up a panel, as you rightly pointed out. It was led by JP Singh Joril. He is the director of another UGC center called InflibNet. It's basically into libraries across higher education institutes. He examined the entire thing. When Bhushan Patwardhan approached him, he and his own team, he went through NAAC audit reports and everything. They stayed in the NAAC campus in Bangalore, went through their internal reports. And according to the Joril committee report, there are several irregularities which have been happening over the years. So I think I've mentioned how the last step in the entire accreditation process is basically about visits by teams of experts. So NAAC has a large pool of experts. So they have around 4,600 experts. These are all academics from various universities and colleges across India. So for every spot visit, they draw some of these names, some of these experts from that pool, and they are sent to carry out those visits. According to the Joril committee report, so only a handful of people have been making those visits time and time again. And the vast majority of the experts are not being used at all. So according to Mr. Joril and his team, it shows that there can be possible conflicts of interest. Why is the same set of people being sent for all these checks? Why are others not being used? Also, the internal system of the NAAC, the information and communication system, they found it to be compromised. So a lot of people without proper authority could actually access the system, according to the report. There are quite a few red flags, but these are the main red flags. If your internal system is compromised, obviously, it's a clear case of irregularity, right? And he wrote to the UGC chairman on February 26, where he expressed his desire to intend to resign, but he didn't resign. Following which, within a couple of days, UGC appointed the former chairman of AICT, Anil Shahasrabudhe, as the new chairman of NAAC. So that happened on March 3. The new chairman was appointed on March 3. On March 4, the next day, Patwardhan wrote back saying, I didn't actually resign. So how can you appoint someone new in my place when I have not even resigned? And he sought an independent inquiry into that entire lapse. He called it a lapse on the UGC's part. And the following day, he resigned. So he was not ready to put up a fight anymore. So he resigned.
And Saurav, what has been the UGC's response to all of this?
So the UGC hasn't really responded so far. But the NAAC has responded. The NAAC director, who is supposed to be one level below the chairman, the NAAC director S.C. Sharma, he issued a public statement saying, their entire system is transparent and it cannot be compromised. And their entire thing is continuously being improved and all that. So obviously he tried to counter these allegations in the Joril report.
You were listening to 3 Things by the Indian Express. Today's show was hosted by me, Rahel Philippos, and it was written and produced by me with the help of Utsa Sarmin and Shashank Bhargav. It was edited and mixed by Suresh Pawar. If you like the show, then do subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. You can also recommend the show to someone who you think will like it, share it with a friend or someone in your family. It's the best way for people to get to know about us. You can also tweet us at Express Podcasts and write to us at podcasts@indianexpress.com.